Shalom and welcome to Wisdom and Torah. Now, I'm 2 days back to back. Oh, my Lord. I'm having a great time. I'm studying a lot. I'm researching. Today, we're going to go back to our research and our study on the book of Revelation. I'm still stuck on chapter 12. The last time I was trying to teach on chapter 12 and all my equipment went crazy. Finally fixed some of it. Thank you for your support and helping me continue the work of the Torah. Now we're getting ready to re-engage in the book of Revelation. By the time I'm done with the book of Revelation, I'm hoping within the next 7 weeks, then we're going to start in the book of Leviticus. Leviticus, we're going to be there for a while. And it's going to be a very exciting time learning about the center of the Torah and how basically it opens the door to the understanding of the Bible when you look at it from a ritual perspective, covenant perspective, and commandment perspective. So we're going to be looking into all of that. But today, we're going to be focusing on Revelation chapter 12, which is the main resource that I'm using for the book of Revelation. Well, there are others, but after chapter 3, I began using this particular word. This particular one is called the New International Greek Testament Commentary by J.K. Beale. And I really recommend this resource. It's probably one of the top 3 resources on the book of Revelation in the world. And I also use other resources for imperial cult, cultural backgrounds, and basically the way I'm trying to cover the book of Revelation in this series is based on its cultural backgrounds. Many times, as you know, people read the book of Revelation and they sometimes try to extrapolate many definitions and even trying to identify their own understanding within the text. I try not to do that. What I want to do, I want to go right to the text in its cultural background, understanding archaeology, history, geography, topography, the context of to whom it was written to. And this is the reason why I went to Turkey, Greece, and Rome 2 years in a row, except for last year, I went to only Turkey and Greece. And the reason why I went is to get to understand more so the audience, the location, the geographical places that the Bible talks about. Many times when we study the Bible, we never consider the audience and how they lived, what they believed, what the values were at that time. And I found that when we look into this understanding, all of a sudden the whole Bible changes in what we thought. And that's when you understand how influenced we have become by theology and denominationalism and people adopting their ideas within the text. And I refuse to do that. I want to go back to the context of what the Bible is trying to tell me. So today, this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be reading chapter 12, and we're going to be covering it in its cultural context. The audience, and I want to repeat this a little bit. Let me review a little bit for the audience who's here for the first time. And I really appreciate everyone that's here right now. And hopefully, please share and also like and put the little bell there and let others know. Share with your friends right now. Maybe they'll jump in here and they try to be active in understanding what we're talking about. We need to recognize something very important. And I'm going to try to go as slow as I can so we have a really solid foundation in what our premise and our objectives are in presenting the book of Revelation. Remember that the book of Revelation was written approximately 30 years after the destruction of the temple. Diaspora, not only for just the believers in Yeshua, but by and large, all of Israel, they went into the dispersion. They were expelled from the land. A small minority remained at the time. And now they are scattered. The whole center of worship, the temple, was destroyed. Now they're living amongst Jews in Rome, in Greece, Asia Minor, and so on and so forth. And they're being confronted with some of the challenges that they never had to deal with before until the destruction of the temple. There were privileges that the Jews enjoyed throughout the empire. Now, those privileges were actually they were damaged or they were threatened by the believers in Yeshua. We see that in Acts chapter 19, Acts chapter 17. There were events in the Bible in which the case against Paul, because Paul was bringing a different gospel than the Romans were used to hearing. I mean, an imperial message, a counter imperial message. Paul is bringing a different language. Evangelion, gospel was not a new word. That was actually was used for the emperor. Okay, that's what the emperor coming into power, he was bringing the gospel. So Paul's message was anti-imperial. It was actually a political resistance against the empire. Now, understanding that, John goes along the same line when the vision that he receives from God through Yeshua the Messiah, according to Revelation chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. Now he is presenting this revelation, right, as a counter-imperial message, utilizing imagery that everyone would have understood. As a matter of fact, much of the imagery that John is using comes from the book of Daniel and also from Isaiah. So there are a lot of things that are similar because of the geographical area. They were transferred over from Persia, Babylon, then Assyria, then Asia Minor, and then Greece, and then Rome. So there are a lot of similarities. And today I want to propose to you about the dragon and the serpent. Where does that come from? And we need to really be very careful, because many times when we study the Bible, we never really understand the context of how the audience who heard it, who saw it, would have understood that. I mean, to us, we are completely removed from its environment. And now we're trying to tap into it. And sometimes it's a little challenging because we try to approach the Bible the way we approach everything else in the Western world. And I hate to tell you, it doesn't work. You have to go back to the time frame when everything was given and study the topography, the geography, the religion, and also the political situation, how they lived, to get a better understanding of the message that we're reading today. And that's what I'm trying to do in my studies in the book of Revelation. So before I continue, I want to encourage you to please subscribe to wisdomandtorah.com. Give me the opportunity to study with me. And hopefully, and I pray that it'll be a blessing to you, and share this with other people so others can also learn. Let's get right into the information here. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to read chapter 12, give you some commentary. Then I have a PowerPoint in which I'm going to talk to you about the dragon and the child and the women and the woman, what those things represent, not necessarily from the 21st century perspective, but trying to draw from what is called the Baal cycle, the cycle of Baal. I'll make a contrast, because the Ancient of Days is talking to the Son of Man, Ben Adam, but the Son of Man, the one riding in the clouds of heaven, and that's the key. Riding in the clouds of heaven would have been understood all the way from the time of the Canaanite culture. They believed Baal was the one riding in the clouds, and that was a representation of kingship. And El was the god of the pantheon, so the one who had dominion over all creation. So therefore, there's a cosmic battle about power and control. I submit to you that the book of Revelation is using the imagery and basically redirect it to give honor and praise and sovereignty to the Creator, who sent his son Yeshua, that he will rule on the earth, so that we will restore the honor and praise to the Father through his son, Yeshua, our Messiah. All right, so let's go right into this. We're going to start reading in chapter 12, and we're going to explain a little, and then we're going to remember chapter 13 is going to continue the theme of the dragon and the serpent and the woman and the child. So this is an introduction. Next week, we will talk about divine judgment, the water judgment. Being thrown in the water, like the children of Israel were thrown in Egypt, like Noah have to go in the water, like Jonah have to go in the water, like Yeshua walking on water. It's all connected with chapter 13. And we're going to cover that next week. So it's something to get you excited about for next week. So in chapter 12, what does it say? Chapter 12, when we start reading, it says, "Then a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and with the moon under her feet, and on her head was a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was screaming in labor pains, struggling to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, a huge red dragon that has 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head were 7 diadem crowns. Now the dragon's tail swept away a third of the stars in heaven and hurled them in the earth onto the earth. Then the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that he may devour her children. Keep that in mind, that devouring in the Bible is trying to kill. Very important that you remember that. It says devour her child as soon as it was born. So the woman gave birth to a son, a male child, who was going to rule over the nations with a rod of iron rod. And we're going to actually cover that in detail because that's quoting the Psalms. So I'm going to give you the PowerPoint in a minute, but that's quoting Psalm chapter 2, verse 9. Her child was certainly caught up to God and to his throne. Obviously, this is a Messiah figure. And she fled into the wilderness, where a place had been prepared for her by God, so she could be taken care of for 1,260 days. Let's stop there. Let us focus only on those first 6 verses, okay? And let me give you some background on this. What is this about? Let's start with the great wonders of the signs. I'm quoting from the JKBO, the book of Revelation, the book that I showed you, this one right here. I'm using this as a commentary for this. It's a very well-regarded commentary. And it says, let's talk about verse 1. Great and wondrous signs appear in heaven. The ancients believed that heavenly signs signal changes on earth. The Magi follow a star a great distance to see the new king of the Jews. Because Herod knew the importance of such an omen, he gathered information about the stars in order to kill potential rivals to the throne, like Matthew chapter 2, verse 1 through 8. Now, during Nero's reign, a comet appeared, and its appearance was generally believed to foretell a change of emperor. Now, this is important. This is what they believe in the first century, specifically the Greco-Roman Empire. Okay, now I'm going to cover about the 666 next week. So many people think it's in regards to Nero, the emperor, and we're going to cover that in detail. But right now, we're going to continue. John's audience now awaits the explanation of the meaning of this astral sign. Now, God protects Messiah and the Messianic community against satanic harm, verse 1 through 6. Many mythologies, this is really important. I want to pay attention to this because I really didn't know this until I began to research this topic. I didn't know about this myth. And I want to really throw it out to you because it's important to understand that in Asia Minor, everyone would have known about this particular mythology. Many ancient mythologies contain a story of an evil usurper who is doomed to be vanquished, and yet unborn prince. By a yet unborn prince. The usurper tries to escape his destiny by killing the prince when he is born. But the prince is unexpectedly snatched away by danger until he is old enough to kill the fiend and claim his rightful inheritance and throne. The version of this story is known in Asia Minor. Was that the goddess Leto, who was pregnant with Apollo, the son of Zeus. She was attacked by the dragon Python because he knew that her offspring had been appointed to kill him. But she was carried to a safe island by winds sent by Zeus. The god Poseidon hid the island under the water so that Python could not find the woman and her child. 4 days after Apollo was born, he found the dragon and slew it. In chapter 12, John records the same story, but he gets his account from the Old Testament. None of the pagan stories from Babylon, Ugarit, Persia, Egypt, and Greece has all the essential elements found in Revelation 12. So John may be reflecting them collectively and interpreting them through the lens of the Old Testament Jewish tradition. He will claim that his is the authentic story from which the others are basically using it for their own, whatever account. Indeed, the whole pagan mythological system, including Roman emperors, claimed the deity. To deity, some emperors identified themselves with Apollo, like Augustus Caesar, and none other than the devil's lie. John was certainly as capable as English poets of almost 2 millennia later who intentionally utilized mythical material in order to give it an interpretation according to the Bible. Now, by the way, many people struggle to understand this. They assume that the Bible is borrowing things that are pagan and that should not be done. But we forget that the biblical narrative has been written in a language that everyone would have understood. And they are redirecting the attention from the pagan gods to the one true God. So keep that in mind when we cover this. So it is important that we do this. Now, what about the dragon? The child, the woman, and the dragon. Let me read a little bit to you about the Ugarit. And this is an important resource that I need you to consider studying. Okay, this is very important. Now, the context of scripture in KTU is actually the most reliable source for Canaanite culture, religion, and rituals. Okay. Now, this particular resource contains the Ugaritic name Litanu. Now, it's important that you consider this Litanu, which corresponds to the biblical Leviathan. Remember, they all shared a geographical location. All of the feasts were actually a counterculture to the Canaanite religion. Remember that. Many people don't realize that. So again, the Hellenization period of Israel, the Hellenized Israel, they are becoming mixed with the Hellenization, with the whole Greek mindset. And before the Greeks were the Babylonians and the Assyrians, and then you have the Canaanites. So there's an influence of cultures being blended together, right? And the Bible is trying to make sense of all of this stuff by retelling the story, attributing all the honor and power and praise to the God of Israel, but is using a language that they would have understood. Instead of the serpent being defeating Baal, it is Messiah defeating through resurrection the serpent that represents the underworld. And that's something we're going to continue to talk about as we go along. Now, the Ugaritic Litan represents the sole lexical parallel to the Hebrew term Leviathan in the ancient Near East. This passage appears to win within a broader mythological narrative. So when you look at this resource here too, KTU 1.5 contains allusions to the conflict between Baal and Anat and the sea monster Leviathan, also identified as a twisting serpent, crooked serpent, and dragon. But guys, chapter 21, look, this is Isaiah 21:7. I'm going to get ahead of the game here. Listen to what it says. On that day, the Lord, with his cruel and great and strong sword, will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the twisting serpent, and he will kill the dragon that is in the sea. That is the same language you see in the book of Revelation, because again, those mythologies migrated all the way to Rome through different names for the same mythology. And now the book of John is actually retelling the story, how the final victory over death, over Leviathan, over the serpent, over the dragon, over Satan will be revealed through Yeshua's resurrection. I hope that makes sense. Okay. And I've been studying now ancient Near Eastern history. Wow. It's 2025. I started in 2009. And I've been researching for the last 16 years. I'm not talking about reading a book here and there. I'm talking about researching all this information to validate the Bible as being the only true document. It's incredible how valid the scripture is. The scripture really outlined for us utilizing their environment and making a complete contrast and a culture attacked on their belief system. And systematically, God is defeating their belief system like he did in Egypt with the 10 plagues. That's exactly the whole pattern that the Lord has used throughout scripture. It's always a cosmic battle. It's like saying, I'm the one who has dominion over creation, and I'm going to use my servants to bring forth that victory. The last one is Messiah, and the ultimate victory is victory over death. That is the whole theme of the book of Revelation. How God is going to defeat death forever. And then he's using the resurrection of Yeshua. And then Yeshua in chapter 5 and 6 is exalted to the position of kingship on the earth. He's going to be the shaliach, the messenger. He's going to be the sent one who's going to do the job of redemption for God on the earth. He is that bridge, the mediator. He's the one who's representing the creator on the earth, and who's going to be the one fighting the war to bring victory to God, just like a king would, except that this one is the son of the living God, Ben Adam, not only to bring Israel back into the fold, but also allow and usher humanity back to the garden. And the last battle will be death. And that's how it would end up in chapter 20, 21, and 22. Keep that in mind, because right now we're getting into the cosmic battle. Who will win that war against evil, against the serpent, against the underworld, against the dragon and Satan? That's exactly what Revelation chapter 2. Let's go there real quick. I'm going to Hebrews. I'm sorry. Read Hebrews chapter 2. I'm going to read it for you here real quick. The book of Hebrews tells you exactly the purpose of Yeshua's death. Chapter 2, verse 14 and 15. Remember that this was written after the destruction of the temple. And the book of Revelation came about 20 years and 25, 26 years after this was written. It says, since therefore the children share flesh and blood, he, Yeshua himself, likewise shared the same things, so that through death he may destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil. Now, in the Qumran community, it's called the Belial. 2 Corinthians call them the same thing. And set free those who live their lives, that all their lives were held in slavery by the fear of death. So as you can see here, our atonement, let's keep reading verse 16. It said, and 17, all the way to 17. For it is clear that he did not come to help the angels, but the descendants of Abraham. Therefore, he had to become like his brothers and sisters in every respect, so that he may become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God to make a sacrifice of atonement for the sins of the people. You see, that was the role of Messiah. Now, that's in the first coming, right? In the second coming, he's going to be doing the role of the kingship. And that's what the transferring of power occurring in the book of Revelation. Now he went from the servant, the suffering servant, he became the high priest. That role is once and for all. He did that once and for all. He's sitting on the right hand of the majesty. Now he's enthroned in chapter 5 and 6. And once he's enthroned, now he's changed his name. Okay, which is what is called anointing for kingship. And then the rest of the book of Revelation is how this king that God appointed to rule over us is going to deliver us from Satan, finally and forever. Hopefully that'll make sense. Yes? Are you with me? All right. So this whole thing has to do with how to understand ancient Near Eastern cultures. Now, let me read a little bit about the dragon stood in front. This is verse 4. In verse 4, chapter 12 says, his tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and threw them onto the earth. Then the dragon stood before the woman who was about to deliver the child. The woman is Israel. The child is Messiah, so that he may devour her child as soon as it was born. Now, we already know what the story is about. I already read it to you, so I don't have to repeat that again. Okay? So what is this all about? I'm not going to continue to read about Michael and defending. I'm going to come back to that after I'm done. Actually, let's read that. It says, then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. Remember, the dragon is Rahab. The dragon is Leviathan. The dragon is the serpent. All those names is the same thing. Satan. Okay? Says the dragon and his angels fought back. But the dragon was not strong enough to prevail. So there was no longer any place left in heaven for him and his angels. So That huge dragon and that ancient serpent, the one called the devil and Satan, adversary, who deceived the whole world, was thrown down to the earth and his angels along with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the ruling authority of his Messiah has now come. Because the accuser of our brothers and sisters and the one who accuses them day and night before God has been thrown down. Now, again, I'm not going to really cover this part in um, the second part of verse 10, because I want to cover that next week when I do the teaching on chapter 13. This is a legal case against the serpent because the serpent, not she, the serpent accused. And we have to talk about bitter waters. We have to talk about divine judgment. And we're going to cover that in detail. It's a teaching that I've done a long time ago. I'm going to repeat it again. Okay. And, as we follow the Creator and who sent his son Yeshua, the Messiah, he's the one who's going to be ruling over us on the earth. So therefore, we have to understand what salvation is. In Greek, the word salvation is called soteria. Okay, let me break this down for you. Soteria. Now, I want to go through this because I think it's important that you understand it. How many of you have never really looked into the word salvation from a Hellenistic perspective and a cultural background? By the way, this is nothing new. The Greeks and the Romans understood salvation from an imperial perspective. The salvation of God is different than the salvation of the Romans. It's a counter-culture message, an anti-imperial message. I submit to you that Paul was bringing an anti-imperial. He was trying imperial message. He was bringing. He was subverting the imperial message with the gospel message. He's showing the audience, Asia Minor, Greece, and Rome, that the salvation of God is greater than the salvation of Rome. And how does it do it? By presenting Yeshua as the Kyrios, as the Lord that God has chosen, that God exalted to bring freedom through his resurrection. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Now, watch this. Soteria in its cultural context. If we go strictly from the lexical range of soteria in the Greco-Roman world, it means in the classical Hellenistic Greek, soteria denotes deliverance from danger, preservation, safety, rescue from crisis like war, shipwreck, famine, and plague, political stability, and civil well-being. That's what soteria represented to the Greco-Roman world. Salvation meant all those things. Now, the LSJ emphasized that in this worldly pragmatic sense, survival, security, and continued order was the main message of their understanding of salvation. Now, the BDAG, which is another very high-end, commentary or dictionary, confirms that outside Jewish Christian texts, soteria rarely implies moral or eschatological salvation. Thus, in the Greco-Roman imagination, soteria, salvation, is experience, visible and political. In other words, the Pax Romana, peace of Rome. You have new roads, you have new cities, you have new temples, you have grain, you have safety. To them, that was soteria, that was salvation, safety, protection of the emperor over the empire. It was more concrete than it is to us in the Western world. We don't really understand the way they were thinking about salvation in the first century. That's why Paul's message is a governmental message, how God's government is greater because the salvation sent by God through his son Yeshua after the resurrection is conveying the message that the God of Israel can provide for you something that the Roman Empire cannot provide for you. Nevertheless, the emperor, he doesn't have the power to give you life. Well, how do we know that is true? He resurrected his son Yeshua. Yeshua, a righteous, just, doing everything correctly, died unjustly, accused of a crime he did not commit, And now God vindicated him and raised him from the dead and placed him in a position of honor. And now he has given that door of inclusion, not only to Israel to be restored, but to the nations to be part of the kingdom by grace through faith. Accepting, though, however, that Yeshua is the one that God has placed in authority. And you have to believe that God raised Yeshua in order to be saved. Soteria. In other words, you have to believe that God resurrected Yeshua to receive salvation. So how can we show this? Let me go here real quick, and I'm going to go to Romans chapter 10. And if I'm right, it should use the word soter. 9:10. Chapter 9, whoops, sorry, it's 10:9. I apologize. Chapter 10, verse 9. You shall be saved. It should say soter. Zozo, I'm sorry, a different word. I apologize. That's why I wanted to change, to verify. In this case, it's talking about zozo, which is like save, salvation, to keep from harm. Okay, what harm are we talking about here? It's talking about death. That's what salvation is in this context. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Okay, the salvation in this context is from death. Salvation from the Greco-Roman world was from their enemies. In this case, other armies and kingdoms. Okay, please let me know if you're staying with me and you know this. Thus, in the Greco-Roman imagination, soteria is experience, visible, and political. Soteria and the language of benefaction, soter, as political titles. Now, check this out. The noun soter, savior, that also the singular for soteria, salvation, was widely applied to the gods, like Zeus, Zoter, or Asclepius, Zoter. I was in Ephesus, and I got to see the temple of Asclepius. Also, I saw it in Athens, and they call Asclepius Soter. Okay, call them the savior. They believed that Zeus was savior, and Asclepius, the god of healing, was a savior. Hellenistic kings, Ptolemy the first, was considered a soter, savior. Roman emperors were considered saviors. So again, the word soter or soteria was not only limited to the biblical use, but is using it in the Bible with a different, framing it differently, giving you the ultimate gift, salvation from death, something that the Roman Empire and something that the emperor could not provide for you. That is the twist that appealed to people in the Greco-Roman world, that the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, came by force, by murder, persecution, and oppression. But the peace of God came through love and loyalty and salvation from death. As long as we were loyal and we will give our allegiance to God through Yeshua, the one whom God appointed as heir of the kingdom on the earth to rule over us. Okay, so Soter was one who defeated enemies, ended civil unrest, restored prosperity, and secured peace. So there was already in the mind of the first century believer an idea that a leader, a strong leader of a government, had to do these things: defeat the enemies, end the civil unrest, restore prosperity, and secure peace. Well, we have the peace of God. We have peace before God. The enemy, in this case, is the serpent, the dragon, Satan, which will be destroyed, thrown in the lake of fire. The final victory is given to God through the resurrection of Yeshua and our faith in God that he resurrected his son. So therefore, the audience in the first century would have understood this perfectly. They would have read the Gospels. They would have read the letter to John and knew exactly the context in every church in Revelation, because of the culture and the language and the historical events that occur there. So again, this was well attested in inscriptions and decrees and honorific titles throughout Asia Minor and the Eastern Mediterranean. I was there. I was in Pergamon when I saw an inscription calling Trajan, which is actually the emperor, after Domitian, after the writing of the book of Revelation. Trajan was the emperor. And there's an inscription in Pergamum, an imperial city, that called him the Kyrios, the master, the Lord of the heaven I'm sorry, the Lord of the sea and land. It's exactly what we saw in the book of Revelation with the angel putting his feet on land and sea. That represented dominion. Okay, so now we have an idea what it means in the book of Revelation in light of its cultural context based on the time frame when the letter was written. Hopefully that makes sense. So imperial cult and soteria, Augustus and the gospel of the empire. Let me continue here, so I want you to see it. Augustus and the gospel of empire, imperial ideology explicitly framed the emperor as a mediator of salvation. They knew that the emperor was now who brought salvation. They believed that they were the representatives of their gods in the Roman Empire. Okay, but the emperor's job, just like in Egypt, the pharaoh's job was to maintain ma'at, to cosmic order, to maintain order from chaos. So was the same with the Roman Empire. So is the same in the Bible. Yeshua's job is to maintain order of the cosmos because God so loved the cosmos that he gave his only begotten son. In other words, the whole message is the same, except that through Yeshua, now we recognize that the Father, the God of Israel, is the only one and true God, and there's no one else, because of resurrection brings a order in the cosmos that no other religion can provide. So again, in the Greco-Roman world, they believe Augustus and the gospel that he taught, the evangelion of the empire, brought peace. Pax Romana to them represented salvation from chaos. Which chaos? All the kingdoms, all the wars. Imperial justice. To them it equals salvation from lawlessness. You have to follow imperial law. Imperial presence, salvation from fear. So if you have the emperor, if you have a statue of the emperor, if you have the Roman legions in your town, you felt secure. As long as the Romans were there, no other countries will mess with you. So to them, that was salvation, safety, protection. Now, the famous Prina calendar in scripture in the 9 BCE declares Augustus' birth as good news, evangelion, for the world, because he brings soteria, through order and peace. Now, contrast that to the birth of Yeshua, and now the message is clear that it is the Son of God, the one of Israel, who brings the true salvation of humanity. Remember, Yeshua is the messenger who brings the salvation of God. Okay, hopefully this makes sense. By the way, if you have a chance, please read the books from these two gentlemen right here. Amazing information. Okay, Stephen Friesen and Simon Price. They have the best books. I've read both books, and they're a little hard reading, but they're definitely worth it. And my understanding of Greco-Roman religion really increased by reading their stuff and their validated information. Now, these particular scholars, they have shown that imperial worship functioned as a system of loyalty and gratitude. Roman saves, subjects respond with honor, sacrifice, and allegiance. Okay? So it's something that you need to remember as we go along here and understand these principles. Now, with that being said, now that we give you a little foundation and a background on this context of the book of Revelation, what I want to do, I want to enhance our understanding of the contrast between the power of Leviathan, the dragon, the serpent, Satan. And I'm going to trace it back to the Canaanite Baal Cycle. And the reason why I'm doing that is because many people are not aware how the literary genres really work in the New Testament. This is something that I highly recommend. And there's a writer, his name is Oni. I hope I pronounced that correctly. But he has a really good book about literary genres in the New Testament. And if you really take the time to study that, you will really get an understanding of what they're trying to convey and the message they're trying to convey. Although the setting of the story of the book of Revelation occurs around the year 90 or later, in the year 100 of the Common Era, the writer is writing in a language that could be traced back all the way to Mesopotamia, and more specifically to the Canaanite culture. And it's all actually transferred over, and it changed names, but it found itself in also in the Greco-Roman world. It's the same story being retold with different names. So what I want to do, I want to take you back to the way the in the Bible, and the reason I do this because in Scripture it presents Yeshua as the one riding in the clouds of heaven. Yeshua himself said it in the book of Matthew. He says, "Surely you've said, but I say to you that Let me go read it. I don't want to paraphrase stuff. I don't like doing that. So let me go. Let me go to Matthew here real quick. I think it's Matthew 26. Matthew 26. Yeshua is getting, and I'm using the Net Bible because I want you to see the references. If you don't know what the Net Bible is, the Net Bible is probably one of the most concise Bibles there are. Give me 1 second, I'll get it for you. The Net Bible comes in a hard copy also, and get the second edition. But what I like about the Net Bible, this is the Net Bible. Now, the Net Bible is full of notes. It's by Thomas Nelson, editorial. But what I understand from this is that this is my understanding. And the reason why I'm using it is because I think 60,000 scholars from Greek, Hebrew, or whatever, they got together. Yeah, there we go. Free access to the Net Bible. The complete set of more than 60,000 translators' notes. So, for what I understand, if they want to translate a Bible, they actually they come here to make sure that they're trying to stay as true as they can to the text. Nothing is perfect, but at least they do a good job trying to do this in a proper scholarly way. I do not use any longer any Hebrew roots messianic translation of the Bible. I'm not going to sit here and bash them, but right now we need to step up a little bit more. A lot of the translation, all they do is just change the name of Yod Heh to God, or to Yod Heh and things like that, or Jesus to Yeshua. And I think we need to move on from that, or we already know the names. So what I do, I go to the Net Bible. And what I like is, let me show you one here, and you see what I mean. This is the text. Hopefully you see it. This is the text, and these are all the textual notes by scholars. Okay, now, again, you got to understand that it's not about denominational, it's about scholarship. So it's got textual notes, it's got different things. And I'm using this in the majority of my studies now because I want you to know the references that I use to share with you. Nothing is perfect, but we're trying to go to the best possible resources so that you know that you can validate the information anytime you want. Okay, don't believe me when I tell you something. Go back and look it up. Okay, and I'm sharing the information so you know where to find it. Okay, all right. So we're going to read here from the Net Bible, and it's in Matthew chapter 26, and I'm going to read here when he gets arrested. Okay, Yeshua says something quite interesting in verse 63. But Yeshua was silent. Then the high priest said to him, I charge you under oath by the living God to tell us if you are the Messiah, Son of God. Yeshua said to him, you have said it yourself, but I tell you from now on, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power. Oh, interesting. That is actually alluding to Daniel chapter 7. Okay, it's very important. You got to remember that. Right hand of the power is a circumlocution for referring to the Creator. Okay, sitting at the right hand of the power. Okay, coming on the clouds of heaven. This is the expression and the reason why I want to connect Revelation chapter 12, because pretty soon it's going to present Yeshua riding in the clouds of heaven in chapter 13. Okay, so I want you to know where that comes from the language that a Jewish person in the first century would have definitely tried to understand. Okay. Now, and the context here is Daniel 7:13. When you go to Daniel 7:13, it tells you, As I watched in the night visions, I saw one like a human being coming with the clouds of heaven, and he came to the ancient one, ancient of days, and was presented before him. Okay? And so the context here is Yeshua himself said a few times that he is Ben Adam, Ba'enosh in Aramaic. And basically he's alluding to Daniel 7:13. In Daniel 7:13 talks about the Son of Man riding in the clouds of heaven. Then Yeshua says, I'm the Son of Man. And then later on, I come riding in the clouds of heaven. When you go to the book of Revelation now, go to the book of Revelation, you see the sign on the heavens. But then when you go to chapter, I think 13, it talks about the one sitting and coming in the clouds of heaven. Chapter 13, 14, I can't remember, okay, of the Son of Man. So we need to connect all these dots in order to understand what the language is. And I submit to you that the writer of the book of Revelation is using the language that every Jewish person would have read this in the first century. They would have understood what it meant. So let's get into that information so that you know what I mean, okay? Okay, so we call this, and the scholars call it, let me go to the beginning here, Chaoskampf in the ancient Near East, the combat myth. That's what it's called. To understand this, you have to really go into what is called ancient Near Eastern studies of the Baal Cycle. And the reason, again, I'm going to reiterate, the only reason why I'm using this is to show you how this is not a new story. It's actually the same story being retold. The difference is that now the writer of John, the writer of Revelation, which is John, is now attributing all the attributes that supposedly Baal had, or the serpent or whatever, now is transferred to the Roman Empire. The same type of problem, different setting. Okay? So instead of the Canaanites and Baal, you go to Mesopotamia, you have Marduk. Then you have, Roman Empire, you have the Zeus, and you have all the gods. And then you have, Baal and Canaanites. And anyway, the whole story in a different geographical location. An Israelite would have known anytime, anywhere where they were located, the stories. And I submit to you that the book of Revelation is written to an audience who would have known the story from the Bible, from the biblical accounts. That's why he's writing it. It just so happened in the Greco-Roman world, they would have understood because they had different names for the same type of imagery. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay? Are you guys enjoying it so far? Yeah, someone here asked a question about the Sabbath by day, if it starts in the day. It's just creating, that's another mess anyway. It doesn't surprise me. When they have nothing else better to do, they keep reinventing the wheel. No, the Sabbath begins in the evening. It's very simple. Anyway, I'll do a teaching on that eventually. I already have the notes. All right, guys. The combat myth, Chaoskampf, and the ancient Near East. Revelation 12 deliberately employs imagery from the widespread divine combat myth in the ancient Near East, where chaos monster threatens divine order and a warrior deity triumph. Again, we're going to have to understand the mindset of what they're saying here. The imagery is talking about the Baal cycle. In this case, is Baal. We're not saying Yeshua is Baal. We're saying there's an imagery and a contrast. Okay? All right. So now, watch this. Whoops. There are three major combat myths, right? The combat myth appears in multiple ancient Near Eastern cultures, each with distinctive characteristics, yet sharing common narrative patterns of chaos versus order. So the Bible is all about chaos and order, how God restores order from chaos. Why do you think Genesis 1:1 is all about? Function and order. How God gave function to creation when it was in chaos and desolate. If you look at this the version of the Bible, which is called, let me go here real quick. I want to show it to you. Okay, if I go to this one, the New Revised Standard Version. But if I go to Genesis on the Net Bible, see what it says in Genesis 1:1. It says, now the earth was without shape and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the watery deep. Now watch. When you go to another very important translation of the Bible that is actually very regarded in the scholarly world, which is called the New Revised Standard Version, updated edition. Listen to what it says here. Watch this. It says, when God began to create the heavens and the earth was complete in chaos, was complete chaos, and darkness covered the face of the deep. I believe this is a better translation because now, from that moment forward, God is bringing order to chaos. That's why Shabbat begins in the evening, because darkness in the ancient Near East represented chaos. And God brought light, brought order from chaos. That's why you go, Shabbat starts in the evening. Now there's a meal, which is a covenantal meal. Then we are proclaiming the Kiddush, the Kiddush, which is the sanctification of the day, which is a fulfillment of Exodus chapter 20, verse 4. And now we become proclaiming God's sovereignty over chaos, living in a house where we have a meal proclaiming God as victorious over creation. He is the king and he is also the redeemer. Okay. So therefore, even from the beginning, we have this. So chaos is the main theme of the book of Revelation and how God will restore order from chaos. Now, the ultimate chaos is death. Let me repeat that again. The ultimate chaos would be death. This is the ultimate chaos that was introduced to a rebellious act in Genesis. And out of that rebellious act by Adam and Eve, now all of humanity dies. We all have been fallen short of the glory of the Lord because no one in our mortality can be in the presence of God because he's immortal. So therefore now, please remember the book of Revelation is conveying a story using imagery, metaphors, and a language to teach you how God is going to destroy ultimately the last step to restore order on the earth. He must destroy death. And the vehicle that God utilized for that to take place is called our Master Yeshua, our Messiah, who became the vehicle that through his death, his resurrection becomes the living proof that it is only the God of Israel who has dominion over life and death. Thus, order is restored once all of humanity recognizes that it is the God of Israel who has that power, who has bestowed honor and glory and also exaltation to his son to rule on the earth as his image, so that everyone would know that it is the God of Israel who rules through him on the earth. Does that make sense? All right. So now let's continue here. Now, Babylonian combat myth. Enuma Elish. Let's compare some of the ancient Babylonian Mesopotamia, okay, to get an idea. In that particular myth, the dragon, the sea serpent, Tiamat, opposes the divine order. The storm god, Marduk, remember in the Canaanite, Ugaritic, is actually Baal, who represents Marduk. And Yam represents the sea. Okay? The storm god Marduk defeats Tiamat, the sea. Now, number 3, the battle establishes kingship and cosmic order. Now you understand why the children of Israel crossed the Red Sea. Now you know why the second generation crossed the River Jordan. Now you know why Jonah asked to be thrown into the sea. And he was swallowed by a whale that represents the great underwater. It represents Tiamat. It represents Marduk. It represents the underworld. You see what I mean? The dragon and the serpent. Next, let's get into the Baal Cycle from Ugarit. In the Ugarit, this is the reference, KTU, by the way. You got to go and look it up and you see what I mean. The sea chaos god is Yam, the sea. And the serpentine monster, Lotan, threatens the gods. The storm god, Baal Hadad, defeats Yam and seven-headed serpent Lotan. You see that? By the way, the book of Revelation talks about the serpent with 7 heads. That's 7 kingdoms. Okay? And I'm going to show you what that means in a minute. I have a picture of it. Said Lotan, which is also Leviathan, is described as a fleeing serpent. The wriggling serpent and the serpent with 7 heads. Now, watch this. Israelite use of the combat myth in canonical texts. These are the best Hebrew texts that you can have, that as far as I know. And listen to what they say. Isaiah 27:1. In that day, the Lord will punish with his sword, his fierce, great, and powerful sword, Leviathan, the gliding serpent, Leviathan, the coiling serpent. He will slay the monster of the sea. Now, Psalm 74, verse 13 and 14. You divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the sea monster in the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan, the heads of Leviathan, because there's seven. You gave him as food to the creatures of the desert. Job 26, verse 12 and 13. By his power, he stilled the sea, by the power of God. By his understanding, he shattered Rab. By his breath, the skiers became fair. His hand pierced the fleeing serpent, destroyed death. That's the message. Psalm 89, verse 9 and 14. You rule the raging of the sea. When its wave mount up, you still them. You crush Rahab like a corpse, and your mighty arm, you scatter your enemies. Amazing. So what's interesting is that the prostitute, think about this, the prostitute in the book in the story of Jericho, what was her name? Wasn't her name Rahab? Interesting. They just finished crossing the river Jordan. The river Jordan divided up from north to south all the way to the city of Adam. New creation motif. And now the city of Jericho do not want to go out and engage the Israelites in battle. Why? They had a very strong fort and a fortress and a city. An ancient city, very well developed by its time. How come they didn't want to come and fight against the Israelites? The woman told them, we have heard that your God controls the sea. And that's why the Lord took Israel to Baal Zephon. When you go here in the Net Bible and you look at Exodus 14, and that's a story coming up pretty soon here in our Torah portion. You have to study this because the deliverance is about death, delivering us from death. It says, the Lord spoke to Moses, tell the Israelites that they must turn and camp before Pi-hahiroth, mouth of gorges, between Migdal, tower, and the sea. You are to camp by the sea before Baal Zephon, opposite it. Okay? So let me go here to the reference. Baal Zephon. The places have tended to identify. Kaiser summarizes the suggestion that Pi-hahiroth as an Egyptian word that means temple of. Okay? Let me continue here and find out R3. Let me find. Let me go to the Bible and I'll find it a little quicker. Just so I don't want to waste time. Let me go to Exodus chapter 14. We have to study this because it's all connected. It's the same story being repeated over and over and over. Okay? Hope you're enjoying this, guys. I'm having a great time teaching. Now, the Lord spoke to Moses. Tell the Israelites that they must turn and camp Pi-hahiroth, right? Baal Zephon. Now, what is Baal Zephon? The place have been tentatively identified by Kaiser summarizes the suggestion that Pi-hahiroth as an Egyptian word may mean temple of Syrian god, okay? The heat water of the canal or dwelling of Hathor, okay? But it also have to do with Baal Zephon, the cycle of Baal. Again, we're coming back to the whole thing again. Watch this. This is a cycle of Baal, what I'm teaching you right now. The Baal cycle from Ugarit presents a unique perspective of the concept of victory over chaos compared to other ancient Near Eastern texts. Family dispute versus cosmic danger. The Baal cycle downplays the dangers of outside chaos by framing the conflict between the storm god Baal and the sea, Yam, as a family dispute rather than a cosmic threat, right? So these are like different ideas about what the whole emphasis is in Exodus chapter 14. Now, what's interesting is that they believed that in the ancient world, that if you have dominion over the sea, you have dominion over creation. Let me repeat that again. They believe in the ancient Near East that if you have dominion over the sea, you have dominion over creation. And this is the reason why in Genesis it says the Spirit of the Lord hovered over the waters of the sea. Now, I want to see if I can find it. Hopefully, I'll be able to find it in my notes here. But I don't know if you've seen the picture of an Egyptian motif of salvation or resurrection every day. Okay, I'm going to find it here on my notes. Give me 1 second, and I'm going to see if I can find it, because when I need stuff, I never get it. Give me 1 second. And I look for a picture of Egyptian, let me see. Give me 1 second. In the Egyptian motif, and you find this, you can find it on the internet, okay? You can find pictures of, find a picture of a boat. You have Ra, you have Osiris in the front of the boat. Underneath of the boat, there's a serpent in which is coiled like waves underneath of it. Then at the head of the boat, Osiris has a staff and he's striking the head of the serpent. The serpent represents Leviathan, Rahab. All the stuff that it represents in Egypt, the serpent represents something. In Canaanite culture, represents something else. It's the same story being told differently. Okay? So when you look into it, in the book of Genesis, what do we find? In the book of Genesis, we find that the head of the serpent is going to be hidden. It's going to be hit. That is actually victory over death. Remember that. Victory over death. So therefore, even in the story of creation, God brings order from chaos, and immediately he creates man out of nothing, right? Out of dust of the earth. He breathed life, resurrection motif, gives them life, puts them in the garden when there's perfection. He's to live forever. Okay? And then what happens is later on, when they sin willfully, what does it tell you? That the seed of the woman will hit the head of the serpent. Well, the woman doesn't produce a seed. So it's interesting because the whole story makes sense if you understand Egyptian mythology, how Ra was supposed to maintain order in the cosmos by defeating the serpent every night. When the sun will come up, that was resurrection. Well, that same story is repeated throughout the history in the Bible. And the story is one of the same, how God brings order by defeating death, which is called the serpent. Hopefully that'll make sense. Okay. Let's go back to the PowerPoint, guys. I want to continue here because I want you to get all this information, at least as much as you can. All right. So let's go here. How Revelation 12 appropriates the Baal Cycle. Now, the Baal Cycle is the closest ancient Near Eastern parallel to Revelation 12 due to shared characters and narrative logic. Now, I took this picture myself from the Bible Lands Museum. I'm sorry, the Jerusalem Museum. I took this picture in November. And as I'm going through all of the stuff, every time I go to Israel, I go to the Jerusalem Museum and the Bible Lands Museum. I spent a lot of information, a lot of time there researching everything. And this year, I found this particular inscription of the seven-headed Leviathan. This is Leviathan. Okay? That's the seven-headed serpent. So as you can see, it's nothing new. It's something that the Bible actually does talk about. Even history talks about. So now we know that the language of Revelation is using something everyone would have known in the first century through every culture, through the Mesopotamian, through the Canaanite, through the Egyptian, and also through the Greco-Roman world. Nothing new. Okay? So the dragon of Revelation 12 is a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. 7 heads, maybe kingdoms, whatever. It's a vassal that we can have an interpretation, but I want you to get an idea what the narrative is about, not the little details of everything going on there. Is that okay? It represents Satan, primordial adversary of chaos, Revelation 12:9. and it drags down a third of the stars in the imagery of astral chaos. Is using cosmology, astronomy, not astrology, but astronomy to convey the message of what's going on here. Okay. Now, John merges Ugaritic chaos imagery with Jewish apocalyptic angelology. Oh my God, I forgot. Angelología in Spanish. Speaking in tongues here now. First Enoch and war tradition of Dead Sea Scrolls. The woman as divine biblical community, not Anat. You see, in the Canaanite culture, it was Anat who helped. Let me tell you how that happens. It's quite interesting. I'll take a few minutes here. This is the story. Baal wants to have a palace built for himself. Then the god El, who was the main god of the pantheon, says, nope, you're not getting a house. You're not getting a temple. So now Baal goes to fight against Mot and Yam, right? And it tells you that Baal was defeated, was killed, and he was devoured as a lamb. Then Anat, his sister and wife, crazy, his sister and wife. Well, by the way, if you understand that detail, then when you read the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, you will understand when Israel's going into the Canaanite communities, they lived in the land of Canaan that became Israel. What is one of the things that Israel is forbidden to practice? Incest. You're not supposed to practice any of those things. It gives you direct instructions who to marry, when to marry, and what family members and what not family not to marry, because it's in connection to the culture of its time. By the way, marrying your cousins and your close families lowers your IQ by a great percentage anyway. So there's a big problem with that. Okay, ask the Muslim world. It's another story. But anyway, so now Baal is going to fight against Mot, death, and then is devoured as a lamb. Then Anat, the sister and wife of Baal, now seeks to fight on his behalf to destroy Mot. Cathar, one of the gods of the pantheon, builds a club for Baal, and then they defeat Yam, the sea, and then they build him a temple, Baal Safon. That's what it's all about. So when God tells Israel to turn and go to the location in chapter 14, is to send the message to the Canaanites that the God of Israel is the one that has dominion over the sea. That's why the sea opened and they walked through it, meaning that it's the God of Israel that has dominion over chaos. Anyone in the Canaanite culture would have understood that. That's why everyone was afraid of the Israelites in the wilderness. And that's what the imagery that the book of Revelation is trying to convey, to retell the story of whom has authority over creation. Who is the one who brings order from chaos? Is the God of Israel through Yeshua's resurrection. Okay? Hopefully you're all enjoying this. If you are, please share the link, hit the like, and hit the little bell. Okay? I need you guys to help me promote this as much as I can. I'm sure that all the people teaching this, I'm doing my best to do it in a way from a Torah perspective. And please help me promote this to other people. I think it would edify them. Okay? Okay, so the woman as a divine biblical community, not Anat. Anat was the daughter and wife of Baal. In Ugaritic myth, Baal had a divine consort, Anat, who sometimes fights for him. Revelation does not reuse Anat as a divine mother goddess. It doesn't do that. The Catholics have done that with Mary. They have attributed to her the attribute of Anat. You know, in many cases, not completely, but in many cases. But the writer of the book of Revelation does not do that. He presents Israel as the woman, because Israel is presented as a female throughout the Bible in the metaphor of a marriage. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. Instead, the woman is a symbolic corporate figure. Zion, faithful Israel, Isaiah 66. verse 7 and 9. The covenant community that gives birth to the Messiah, God's people in tribulation. An echo of substance in the desert like Exodus 16 and Hosea chapter 2, verse 14 and 15. John demystifies the divine feminine figure and by reassigning her symbolic role to Israel. The community of first century believers, Koster and Ani here, and Beale talks about the same thing. These are the leading scholars on the book of Revelation talking about this particular topic. Now, 3, the male child as a messianic warrior king. In the Baal cycle, after defeating Yam, Lotan, Leviathan, Baal becomes king and builds his palace, Baal Zephon. Okay? Now, in Revelation 12, the child is a messianic king of Psalm 2 to rule with a rod of iron. So therefore now, the book of Revelation is actually attributing kingship to Yeshua, whom God has placed him there. Okay, remember? This is important. He is snatched up to God's throne, enthronement, chapter 4 and 5 of the book of Revelation. Victory is assured even before the final battle is narrated. Okay? Now, John aligns the comeback hero here not to Baal, but Messiah Yeshua, integrating Psalm 2, the Messiah as warrior king. He's quoting Isaiah 9 and verse 11. Daniel chapter 7 is making Yeshua as the Son of Man receiving the dominion in Daniel 7. Is making the connection, utilizing literary genres of the ancient world, what the ancient Israelites believed living in Canaan, and conveying the message in contrast to the Greco-Roman world, and actually an anti-imperial message is repleted with information. Number 4, the wilderness as divine protection. In the Ugaritic mythology, it uses the wilderness and mountains, Mount Zephon, as divine places. However, in the wilderness in Revelation is biblical, not mythical. It alludes to Exodus and Hosea, place of testing and protection. It appeared again in Revelation chapter 12, verse 14 and 16, though ego imagery now is salvation. Okay, we're going to talk about that a little later. Number 5, the cosmic war, celestial versus terrestrial. In the Baal cycle of Baal, the divine conflict reshapes the cosmos, reign of Baal, reordering of divine space. That's what it belongs to them. In Revelation chapter 12, the dragon's attack unleashes a cosmic conflict that spans heaven and earth. Revelation 12, verse 7 through 12. The defeat of the dragon in heaven precedes his earthly persecution. The divine reign is not of Baal, but the reign now is of God, and later given by God to Yeshua as the Messiah on the earth. Hopefully that makes sense. There's perfect order of a hierarchy. Okay? Now, structural parallels between Revelation 12 and the Baal cycle. What are the elements? Heavenly conflict. And then the Baal cycle is Baal versus Yam. In Revelation is the woman, the child, and the dragon. The element in the Baal cycle versus Revelation is chaos monster. 7-headed serpent, seven-headed dragon. Similar and the same. And the thread of divine order. In the Baal cycle, the sea god threatens the cosmos. And in Revelation, the dragon awaits to devour the child. It's the same imagery in a different location, a different enemy, the same result. God has dominion over death. Okay? Now, the element is a war hero, a war general per se. And the Baal, the storm god, Baal cycle is Baal, the storm god. In Revelation, it is the Messiah. That's why it's attributing Psalm 2. And also Revelation 19 talks about Yeshua being the one who will rule and reign. Victory as the element of enthronement. In the Baal cycle, Baal obtains place and reign, a palace and reign. In Revelation 12, the child is caught up to God's throne. Revelation chapter 5 and 6 deals with the enthronement ceremony. That's why Yeshua is exalted. Okay? Cosmic consequences. In the Baal cycle, the whole defeating of Yam brings an order established. In Revelation 12, the dragon cast down, persecution erupts. These are like some of the elements that we deal with. In the Baal cycle, the divine female figure, Anat, is Baal's consort and sister. They fight for him. In Revelation, it's not a divine woman, it's just Israel. It's called Zion, the community. It's not a goddess. It's completely reshaped. So the Baal cycles provide the mythical model, but Revelation subverts it. The fighting hero is Yeshua, the Messiah. Okay. The mother, the goddess, becomes Israel as Zion, but not a goddess, but more so like an entity here. The monster is Satan, it's not Leviathan. The victory is eschatological, not mythical or cosmological. It's about an eschatological message that the resurrection of Messiah brings forth a set of events that basically will bring the final victory over chaos, victory over the serpent, victory over Satan. The second temple and the rabbinic background transformed the myth. They kind of transformed it. Okay, so the key transformation, the dragon and the serpents and angelic revels. Okay, first Enoch. The war scroll portrays spiritual forces in cosmic conflict. For some reason they changed the context a little bit. The comeback myth, in the rabbinic circles, they call it eschatological deliverance. Qumran interprets it, Isaiah 27:1, Leviathan as an end-time enemy, which is the enemy, Belial, which is Satan. Zion or Zion as the birth of the Messiah. Isaiah 66 talks about that. Also, Micah talks about this. Revelation follows this prophetic, not mythical tradition. Okay, so Revelation 12 does not perpetuate pagan mythology. It absorbs the imagery of chaos into a Jewish apocalyptic and covenantal worldview. That's really what it's doing. It's trying to teach us they are using something they knew to convey the message of deliverance. And it is important that we know this. Okay, so let's talk about this theological and covenantal language in Revelation from a suzerain vassal dimension. Okay, suzerain is a great king. The vassals are the kings of lower status submitted themselves to this great king. In this case, God is a great king, and we are his vassals. Okay, Yeshua, according to the Bible, Yeshua becomes the Prince of God on the earth, and he is the king to Israel and then the nations. There's a hierarchy of order. Yeshua becomes the image of that invisible God on the earth, the representation of his glory. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3. The character is like the image of who God is, the representation of his authority. He's going to be ruling and reigning on the earth. So the whole earth will be vassals to God. And God says, if you are my vassals, you have to submit to the authority of the one whom I sent. It's his son, Yeshua, who God resurrected and put him in the authority of kingship. He exalted the Messiah. Okay, so let's go a little bit into this particular theme. The enthronement of the child, covenantal kingship. The language of the rod of iron in Psalm 2 is royal suzerain terminology. The Messiah is the faithful vassal who receives universal dominion from God, the sovereign. He's the sovereign of all things. That's why we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Blessed are you, O Lord, King of the universe. God will forever be the king of everything. Okay? Now, the woman here is a covenant people under attack, similar to Deuteronomy's pattern of blessing and curses. The people suffer persecution, a dimension of curse, and they are preserved by God, a dimension of blessing and protection. 3, the dragon. It's an anti-suzerain rival power. It's a counterfeit sovereign, like the false Messiah, reflecting the chaos monster of the ancient Near East that oppose order and royalty. Now, the summary, how Revelation 12 uses and transcends the Baal cycle. So it can the continuities with ancient Near East and Baal cycle, 7-headed chaos, serpent, cosmic conflict, threat of divine order, heroic figure linked to royalty, and symbolic women in the narrative. Let me ask you all a question. How many of you never consider everything that I'm sharing with you today when you read Revelation chapter 12? How many of you are learning something new, a connection of the story, one story being retold over and over and over and over? It's the same story being retold in different eras. It's not a difficult way to understand the Bible if only we tap into the storyline. It's like if you're in a highway and you look at a highway from afar. Let me give you an example. The Autobahn in Germany. I've seen videos of people just flying through, and I'm thinking, man, that's crazy and scary. But then I visited Germany a few times, and some of my students, they took me on the Autobahn. And once you're in there and you go with the flow of the traffic, it's really not scary because they're all going in the same direction and everyone understands the rules. You don't want to be on the left lane if you want to go 35 miles an hour. You'll die. If you want to go 120 miles an hour, you don't go on the right lane. You stay on your lane. And then you know that on that lane, everyone's going to be faster. So therefore, when you are in your car and you're going in the Autobahn in Germany, then you know the rules. It's not as scary because now you know how it works. It's only from afar when you don't know the rules. When you read scriptures, sometimes we always go to our own interpretation to areas that we don't quite understand. And do a search on Google and do a search on YouTube. I've done this. I go in and I look for commentaries on the book of Revelation. Boy, have I heard some crazy stuff. And I'm thinking, am I smarter than them? No. It's just that based on their theology, denomination, and mindset, they're not tapping into that flow of information that it continues to blend and brings more clarity to the narrative they're reading to an audience in the first century. Remember, the book of Revelation was written to an audience in late first century, not to us in the 21st, in a language, in a culture they would have understood. So to them, the false prophet or the false Messiah was the emperor. I mean, to them, it would have been simple. To them, the mark of the beast, the sign of the beast, would have been the emperor. Okay, you have to fall under the authority of the Roman Empire. To buy or sell, what does that mean? Well, if you go to Ephesus, if you go to Turkey and Greece, you know that they had associations, trade guilds. And in order for you to survive, you needed to become part of a trade guild. Your life was identified with whom you were associated with. These associations, actually, they did a food sacrifice to idols. They ate food sacrifice to idols. They worship a patron god or goddess. And the whole identity of honor and shame was based on to whom they belong to. If they now serve the God of Israel through Yeshua the Messiah, they cannot eat meat sacrificed to idols. They cannot worship other gods. They cannot do what those associations were doing. So now they cannot buy or sell. No one would have any connection with them. Now, in the beginning of the first century, the believers in Yeshua, they were considered like an extension of Jews in those areas. There's evidence of that. But after the destruction of the temple and the separation of the gospel, in which now you have the Roman Jews, believe me, they're Roman Jews, and the time of who was it? Pompey. And they conquer Israel. They destroyed the temple. They took slaves to Rome. Okay, and then they never went back to Israel. Eventually, those Jews became citizens of Rome. There's still generations there back from that time. I was just there last year. So then what happens is those Jews who lived in Rome, they don't want to lose their privileges in the Roman Empire. They were citizens. They have full rights. Now you have the Gentiles coming into the gospel, and then the Jews that believed in Yeshua, and created a huge chaos that created a separation, specifically after the destruction of the temple. And you see that in the Gospels, and you see that in the book of Acts when Paul was going places, and people were saying, "This guy's teaching another king." That was subverting the imperial message, teaching that there's another one who's greater than the emperor. And Paul's message was that Yeshua is the one appointed by God, and that he's greater than the emperor because God resurrected him and gave him the authority over creation. Imagine that message being taught by a Jew in the Greco-Roman world. But they couldn't do anything to Paul because he was a Roman citizen. They can kick him out of the city, but they cannot do anything to him because of all the privileges they had. So I submit to you that when you read the book of Revelation, you have to at least consider that the audience that the writer is writing to is not us. We need to tap into their culture, into their language. And like somebody just mentioned, that my brain doesn't, that person says their brain doesn't retain so much. And I'm just blessed to have the sources that I could put them together and share them with you. It's a lot of time for study, but it's worth it because hopefully some of the stuff that I'm learning will help you balance your understanding of the Bible to be more concrete with what you believe. Yeshua is our Messiah. We can prove it. The God of Israel gave them the authority to rule and reign on the earth when he returns. We can show it. But if we do not understand the language and the culture and the way they lived during the biblical narrative and their environment, we're always going to be depending on someone's interpretation. And that's when we get in trouble. When we depend on someone's understanding of the text instead of heading right to the context of the culture, the language, the history, the geography, and topography of the people in question. So I pray that today this was a blessing to you and that you're able to at least understand a little bit more that the writer of the book of Revelation, John, who received the vision from Yeshua, whom God gave to Yeshua to give to his servants, it's a little easier to understand if only we consider the culture and the background and the audience that we're dealing with. Next week or in a few weeks, we're going to be talking about chapter 13, and we're going to continue talking about this theme of the dragon. I'm going to try to pick something in chapter 13 that I haven't covered so I don't mention the same thing again. But please review this video if you want to understand chapter 13. This will help you at least have that foundation solidified. So when we start covering other areas, things will start making more sense. Well, may the Lord bless you. Please consider joining wisdomandtorah.com. And by the way, I have a tour to Israel in November. All of the information is there. Please come to the land of the great king. Allow me the privilege to show you how beautiful the land is. The land is good. It's very good. And if you dare go to the land, don't worry, you'll be safe. The Lord is, if he invites you, he will protect you. I will do my best to show you all the stuff within the land of Israel. So then when you open the Bible, hopefully it'll become as alive as it is for me today. Shalom to all of you. We'll see you guys. Thank you for your time and thank you for your patience. Be blessed.